In this video, you'll learn everything that you need to know about the Insta360 1RS 1-inch 360 edition. And that's a pretty long name for a camera. So you might be a little bit confused, as I was when I first heard about this camera, because Insta360 makes a camera called the 1RS, as well as this one, which is the 1RS 1-inch 360 edition. What's the difference between 1RS and the 1-inch 360 edition? Well, Insta360's 1RS is an action camera that has swappable modules. It pretty much looks like a regular action camera, and it comes with different modules, including a 5.7K 360 camera option. The 1RS 1-inch 360 edition is kind of like the premium version, which features dual 1-inch sensors and 6K resolution video. And the lenses are also co-engineered with Leica. The 1-inch 360 edition is more comparable to other Insta360 cameras, such as the X range of cameras, and the latest edition of the X range is the X3, which is this one. Now, while the X3 uses half-inch sensors, the 1-inch 360 uses 1-inch sensors. The 1-inch 360 is quite a bit bigger than the X3. They do work in a similar way though. Mount them to an invisible selfie stick and walk around, or use mini tripod legs and have them standing in a fixed position. The X3 is more portable and it can be used underwater. And as well, the X3 can shoot up to 120 frames per second at 4K resolution if you're in bullet mode, while the 1-inch 360 can only go up to 50 frames per second and then only at 3K resolution. So why should you buy this 1-inch 360? Well, if better image quality is your top priority, then the 1-inch 360 is the one to go for. The 1-inch 360 is going to give you a greater dynamic range, which means if you're filming indoors, windows are less likely to blow out. Even when you're filming outside in the daylight, you should get a more even image tonally. Because if you have a low dynamic range camera sensor, you might find that you either have to choose between a dark landscape or a blown out sky. And as well, in low light conditions, the bigger sensor is more sensitive, and therefore you should get good nighttime images without loads of digital noise appearing. Another difference between these two cameras is that the X3 can shoot in single camera mode. So rather than using both of these cameras, you can switch so that it just uses one, whereas the 1-inch 360 edition always uses both cameras, at least at the moment. So these are my first impressions of using the 1-inch 360 edition camera. Although it is a bit bigger and a bit heavier than the X3, I didn't really find it made any difference to the filming experience. In fact, as you may know, having a heavier camera can make it easier to keep it steady, because that extra weight counterbalances your muscles and makes movements smoother. And as you can see, it was cold. In fact, it was about -6 degrees. Probably if you live in Canada or something, you'll think, what's the big deal? But as a softy Englishman, I'm not really used to that kind of temperature. Anyway, at first I kept taking my gloves off to switch on the camera and start recording, but then I realized I could actually keep my gloves on. I do really like the way this is designed. The power button is at an angle and it's kind of in this little nook. And that does make it easy to find and use, even with these big woolly gloves on. As well, I was able to press the record button no problem. So that made this a really nice filming experience. On the downside, I did miss the big touchscreen on the X3, because the 1-inch 360 edition is back to something similar to the X2's touchscreen. So it is a little bit more fiddly. I do find the touchscreen buttons and functions sometimes a little bit difficult with my big fingers, and sometimes it takes a couple of taps. For that reason, you're probably better off changing settings using the app, which is a bit less fiddly. To set up your 1-inch 360 edition, first take off all the plastic protectors. Before using, you do need to install a micro SD card and download the Insta360 app, which you're going to need to activate your device. You need to take the whole thing apart. First press in these two catches at the side and then pull off the lens module. Open up the USB-C cover, which is at the bottom on the side. And now these two sections need to be removed from the sleeve. So it can be a little bit tricky, but I found that I could just get a little bit of a grip using the USB-C socket and then just gently push upwards. Now you can pull these two sections apart and you will see that they are connected by a USB-C connector. The micro SD card slots in here in the middle section below the USB-C socket. So you need to press it in until it catches and then it's locked in place. And now reassemble the different parts of the camera and power on. The 1-inch 360 might now format the micro SD card. To choose the language, just tap the tick in the corner, and after that you can connect the camera to the Insta360 app and activate. Now make sure your smartphone has Bluetooth and Wi-Fi enabled. Connecting it can take a few minutes, especially the first time you connect a new camera. Now tap the icon at the bottom in the middle to get a view of the 360 camera. Swipe the screen to change the view. Now, this isn't going to affect any video that you record, as this camera will always capture the full 360-degree view, no matter what you do. To charge the 1-inch 360, open the USB-C cover at the bottom and connect to some kind of charging adapter. So I just use the same cable and adapter that I used for my MacBook Air. So the light here will be red while it's charging and then switch off once it's fully charged. And just make sure that your camera has the latest firmware. And normally it will automatically detect if there's new firmware to install, and then it's going to ask you if you want to go ahead and install it. Otherwise, you can open settings in the app and then just check there to see if there's a new version available. When you switch on the 1-inch 360, you're going to see the camera view with some information at the edges. If you actually just don't do anything for a few seconds, the information disappears and you're left with just the camera view. And if you do nothing for a few more seconds, the screen actually switches off completely to save battery. Now you just tap the screen to wake it up and tap to bring back the infographics. Now there are two buttons at the bottom of the screen. They're a little bit faint, but you can see a magnifying glass icon and a speech bubble icon. So you just tap the magnifying glass and that will switch the style of camera view. And you'll just cycle through default, fisheye, and tiny planet view. And the speech bubble opens up a quick menu of preset settings. The top left is the remaining memory, top right is the remaining battery. At the bottom we've got the current camera mode on the left and the current camera settings in the middle. And at the moment you can see the camera is set to 6K, 2:1 and 30 frames per second. So I guess the 2:1 means 2 sensors are being used and they're combined to create one video. Anyway, there are currently only 2:1 options. So does it really matter? I don't know. Now, if you double tap the screen, it changes mode, and you can now swipe the screen to change view. So if you tap the arrows in a circle button, you can switch between the 2 cameras. Again, this doesn't affect the recording, it just changes the view on the screen. And then you just tap the arrow on the left to return to the normal screen mode. If we tap this setting, we open up the resolution and frame rates, and we can select between 3K, 4K and 6K. When in 6K or 4K, there are 3 different frame rates: 30 frames per second, 25 frames per second, and 24 frames per second. 24 frames per second is the film look frame rate. 25 is for filming in Europe and other places with 50 Hz electricity supply. And 30 frames per second is the highest frame rate, which will look a little bit smoother, but also a little bit less like film. So if you set the resolution to 3K, you can now shoot at 50 frames per second. If you want to learn more about how frame rates, resolution, shutter speed, ISO and other settings affect the look of your video, you can join us on Patreon, where we have video lessons dealing with these kind of subjects and ebooks that also look into this kind of stuff. So you just tap the X in the corner to close these settings. Now swipe from the right to open up more settings, and here you can switch between auto and manual exposure. Now if you don't want the exposure to keep changing as you move around, or if you want a specific setting, for example a slower shutter speed, then use manual. And for more convenience, just keep this on auto. And we can swipe along the bottom here to find different settings. The 3 circles is for color profiles, and we can choose between vivid, standard or log. Vivid adds extra contrast and saturation and is good if you don't want to do any color work on your video when editing. Log is low contrast and saturation and gives you the most options when you're color grading. And standard is kind of somewhere in the middle, so good if you just want to do a little bit of color work. Swipe to EV, which stands for exposure value, and you can change this if you want to keep using auto exposure, but you want it to compensate darker or brighter. Swipe along to set white balance. Again, for convenience, you can just leave this on auto. But if you don't want the color in your frame to keep changing as you're moving, set this manually. Switch on isolated exposure if you want the 2 cameras to set exposure independently. Now you would only use this in certain situations. For example, if you're in a car with 1 camera facing outside and 1 facing inside. If you swipe down from the top, you open up another group of settings. So swipe to the second page of settings and tap the cog. Tap general and scroll down to sharpness. For best results, it is recommended to use one of the lower sharpness settings, either medium or low, unless you specifically want a sharp image, because lower sharpness means any noise in the image will be less obvious. And if the image is too sharp, it can be a little bit harsh on the eye. As well, you can always add extra sharpness later if you feel you need it. Anti-flicker just helps you reduce or remove that flicker that you sometimes get from artificial lights. Some countries have 50 Hz electricity and some have 60 Hz electricity. So choose the one appropriate to the country that you're filming in. Now we're ready to get filming some high quality 360-degree content. Now when you're recording video, you actually get some different buttons on the screen. On the left in the middle is a picture-in-picture button, and this allows you to show 2 different angles at the same time. And this is something that you can actually do in the app as well. On the right, the button with the circular arrows reverses the camera view, like switching from front to rear camera in your smartphone. And if you press the flag button, it just adds a marker at that point in the video clip. So it's going to be easier to find that moment in the clip later when you come to edit. And finally, on the right at the bottom is a tracking button, and just tap that to start tracking while you're recording. Now that you've recorded your footage, where is it? Well, to view the footage that you have recorded, just swipe up from the bottom of the screen. Top left, you're going to see an icon, and next to that is the number of media files that are currently stored, which is next to the number of the file that you're currently looking at. So just swipe left and right to change clips, and then press the play button to play the clip. While a clip is playing, you can actually swipe the top of the screen to change the view. And this is something a little bit new. You can swipe the bottom half of the screen to scrub through the clip to find the part that you want. Tap the icon in the left corner to view all the clips in a kind of gallery format, and then just swipe left and right to scroll through your clips. Tap the select button and then choose one or more clips, and this is a good way to delete multiple files quickly. And to return to normal, just tap one of the files and then swipe down to close the gallery. To use the footage that you've shot on your 1-inch 360 edition, you're going to need to get it from the camera to your smartphone or your computer. If you want to edit and reframe footage using the Insta360 app, then you can connect as I showed you before, and then either edit with the footage still on the camera or import it onto your device. It's recommended to import it onto a smartphone because otherwise it's a bit slow. And if you want to edit and reframe your footage using the Insta360 Studio, then you need to connect your camera to your computer using a cable. Open Insta360 Studio and it should automatically detect the camera and ask if you want to import the footage. So, should you use the Insta360 app or the Studio? Well, the Insta360 app and Studio are completely different platforms really, with totally different user interfaces. They also enable you to do different things. The main difference is that the Insta360 app can only export at a maximum of 1080p, while the Studio software can export up to 4K. So if you do want the highest quality, which I'm sure you do, otherwise you wouldn't be interested in the 1-inch 360 edition, then don't use the app, just use the Studio. Use the cable provided or a USB-C to USB-C cable if your computer has USB-C ports, as my MacBook Air does. And you actually need to set your camera correctly, otherwise it's not going to connect. So swipe down from the top, go to the second page, tap the cog, tap General, and then tap USB mode, and make sure it is set to UDisc mode. Now connect your camera and give any permissions that you need to give. Open Studio and choose whether to import all or just pick individual files to import. And now you can add keyframes, which means that you can animate camera movements, zoom in and out, and just generally reframe. And you do get a lot of flexibility in the Insta360 Studio software. Another thing you can do in the Insta360 Studio software is to use different stitching methods to try to find the one that looks best. And you can also recalibrate. And so if you are having issues with the stitching, you can try these different methods and then just find the one that looks best. If you want to connect an external microphone to your 1-inch 360 edition, you need to get an adapter. Insta360 makes one and you can get it from their store or other online stores. So the adapter just plugs into the USB-C socket at the bottom here. There's also a bracket that you can get which locks onto the side. And then you can add a wireless mic, for example, the Rode Wireless Go 2 system or something similar. And so the receiver would mount here, and then you can connect that to the transmitter, which you hook onto your clothes. And because the way the 360 camera works, this mic is going to be invisible. So if you want to boost your mobile videography skills, you can join us on Patreon. We've got loads of video lessons there which you can watch specifically to take you from beginner to advanced. I have quite a few lessons dealing specifically with camera movement. It's one thing to have like smartphones with gimbals and 360 cameras that you can fly around all over the place and program in these amazing camera movements, but it's another thing to actually understand how to use them and how to use the language of camera movement to make your videos more professional. So that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next video.